Anna stepped off the bus, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The quiet town in Brazil, with its sun-drenched streets and vibrant flora, seemed idyllic, yet something in the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. She adjusted the strap of her worn-out bag, which held the few belongings she owned, and gazed up at the mansion that loomed before her. It was a grand structure with sprawling gardens and intricate architecture that whispered tales of wealth and sophistication. The white facade gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the sound of birds chirping provided a serene backdrop. Yet as she approached the wrought iron gates, a chill ran down her spine. "Welcome, Anna." A voice broke her reverie. It was Mariana, the lady of the house, her smile radiant, yet somehow forced. "We've been expecting you." "Thank you, ma'am," Anna replied, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped inside. The interior was as stunning as the exterior, filled with ornate furniture and an air of luxury. But as the door closed behind her, the atmosphere shifted. Shadows seemed to cling to the corners, and the silence felt almost too thick to breathe. After a brief tour of the mansion, which included a sweeping staircase and a grand dining room, Mariana led Anna to her new quarters. It was a small but cozy room with a window overlooking the garden. As Anna began to unpack, placing her meager belongings on the dresser, her fingers brushed against something cold and hard, hidden in a dusty corner. Curious, she knelt down and pulled out an old diary, its cover cracked and worn. "What's this?" she murmured to herself, flipping it open. The pages were yellowed and the handwriting was frantic, filled with thoughts of fear and desperation. The entries spoke of the previous maid, Clara, and her strange experiences within the mansion. Anna's heart raced as she read about Clara's growing paranoia, her belief that she was being watched, and the chilling mention of her sudden disappearance. "Anna, dinner is ready!" Mariana's voice echoed from the hallway, pulling Anna back to the present. She quickly closed the diary, a sense of unease settling in her stomach as she tucked it under her pillow. Was this all just a figment of Clara's imagination, or was there something more sinister lurking in the mansion? As Anna made her way to the dining room, she noticed Lucas, Mariana's husband, sitting quietly at the table, his expression unreadable. The three of them gathered around the grand dining table, adorned with an extravagant meal. The tension in the air was palpable, and Anna felt the weight of their gazes, as if they were assessing her every move. "Please enjoy," Mariana said, her voice overly cheerful. "We've prepared your favorite dish, feijoada. It's a specialty of ours." "Thank you. It looks delicious," Anna replied, forcing a smile as she served herself. But as she glanced between the couple, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. Lucas's eyes darted to Mariana, and for a fleeting moment, there was a flicker of something, fear, guilt, before it vanished behind a practiced smile. "Tell us about yourself, Anna," Lucas prompted, his tone polite, but there was an edge to it. "What brought you here?" I needed a job, sir." Her voice trembled slightly, and she felt small under their scrutiny. "I want to help my family back home." "Ah, family," Mariana said, her smile faltering for a brief moment. "It's important, isn't it?" There was an intensity in her gaze, as if she were searching for something in Anna's response. As they conversed, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that the couple was playing a role, their laughter too loud, their smiles too wide. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on her, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. After dinner, as she retreated to her room, the diary weighed heavily on her mind. She had to know more about Clara. What had happened to her? Why had she vanished without a trace? As Anna lay in bed, the shadows danced on the walls, and she couldn't help but feel that the mansion was alive, its secrets whispering just beyond her reach. The sense of foreboding settled deep in her bones, and she knew that her new job would be anything but ordinary. As the sun rose over the quiet town, casting a golden hue on the opulent mansion, Anna moved through the expansive halls with a sense of duty and unease. Each day began with her familiar routine, yet the atmosphere felt charged, as if the very walls were whispering secrets she was not meant to hear. The echoes of her footsteps bounced off the polished marble floors, but the silence that followed was unsettling, as if the house itself held its breath. While dusting the elaborate chandeliers in the grand foyer, Anna paused, her heart racing. She could have sworn she heard a voice, a faint, anguished whisper drifting through the air. "Hello? Is someone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. But the only response was the soft rustle of the curtains swaying in the gentle breeze. Shaking off the chill that slithered down her spine, she resumed her chores, but the whispers persisted, flickering at the edges of her mind like a distant memory. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the attic, a sense of foreboding enveloped her. The dim light struggled to penetrate the gloom, and the dust motes danced like tiny lost souls. Anna's eyes were drawn to an old trunk, its surface marred by years of neglect. An inexplicable urge surged within her, an insatiable curiosity that gnawed at her determination. She approached the trunk, her fingers trembling as she traced the intricate carvings along its sides. "What secrets do you hold?" she whispered to herself, heart pounding in anticipation. But just as she was about to lift the heavy lid, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind her. "Anna, what are you doing up here?" Mariana's voice cut through the silence like a knife, sending a jolt of fear through Anna. The woman stood at the threshold, her expression a mix of concern and something darker, almost possessive. "Just cleaning," Anna replied, forcing a smile. But the weight of Mariana's gaze felt suffocating. "I found this trunk. It looks old." Mariana stepped closer, her demeanor shifting in an instant. "Oh, that thing? It's just old junk. You shouldn't waste your time on it," she said, her voice strained. "Let's focus on the things that really matter." Anna nodded slowly, the unsettling feeling deepening in her gut. "Of course, Mariana. I just thought..." "Thought what?" Mariana interrupted, her tone sharp. "That you could rummage through our belongings? This is a private home, not a museum. Now come downstairs. Dinner will be ready soon." As they descended the staircase, Anna stole one last glance at the trunk, a shiver coursing through her. What had she almost uncovered? The question haunted her as she joined Lucas and Mariana at the dinner table, the air thick with tension. That night, sleep eluded her. The shadows in her room seemed to stretch and twist, whispering secrets that made her skin crawl. As she drifted into a restless slumber, the dream came. She found herself in the dimly lit attic, the air heavy with dust and despair. There in the corner stood a figure, a young woman with hollow eyes and outstretched hands. "Help me," the woman pleaded, her voice a mere echo of desperation. "You have to find the truth. They can't keep hiding it." Anna's heart raced, and she reached out, but the figure dissolved into mist, leaving her gasping for breath. She awoke with a start, the remnants of the dream clinging to her like fog. Clara, the name echoed in her mind, a haunting melody that would not fade. Determined to uncover the truth, Anna sat up, her mind racing. Who was Clara? What had happened to her? The fragments of the diary flashed before her eyes, and she knew she had to dig deeper, to unveil the secrets intertwined with her employers' lives. As dawn broke, casting a pale light across her room, Anna felt the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on her. She could not ignore the whispers any longer. The mansion, with its ornate beauty and hidden darkness, was a labyrinth of shadows, and she was determined to navigate its treacherous paths. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had to find Clara, to give her a voice that had been silenced for far too long. Anna's heart raced as she stood in front of Mariana, the diary clutched tightly in her hands. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the ornate walls of the mansion, and she could feel the weight of the secrets pressing down on her. "Mariana," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I found this diary in my room. It belonged to the previous maid, and it talks about unsettling things. I think we need to talk about it." Mariana's eyes widened momentarily before she let out a nervous laugh that echoed in the otherwise quiet room. "Oh, Anna, you really shouldn't take those old stories to heart. They're just remnants of the past, nothing more," she replied, her smile strained and unconvincing. The way she spoke with a forced lightness only deepened Anna's unease. But she disappeared. What if something happened to her? Anna pressed, her brow furrowing with concern. Mariana's expression darkened for a fleeting moment. "People come and go, Anna. You'll learn that in this line of work. Now, why don't you focus on your duties? I'm sure you have a lot to do." With that, she turned on her heel, leaving Anna standing alone, a sense of foreboding creeping into her thoughts. Determined to uncover the truth, Anna spent the next few days going about her chores with a heavy heart. The whispers she had heard before seemed to grow louder in her mind, urging her to seek the answers hidden within the mansion. One evening, as she dusted the shelves in the attic, a glimmer of light caught her eye. It was from a small door, barely noticeable among the cobwebs and old furniture. Anna's curiosity piqued, and she approached the door, her heart pounding. She pushed it open and found herself in a dimly lit room filled with old photographs. The walls were plastered with images of past maids, their faces eerily similar, each frozen in a moment of dread. A chill ran down her spine as she examined the pictures. There was something unsettling about how they all shared the same haunted expression. "What happened to you all?" she murmured under her breath, her fingers brushing against the dust-covered frames. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her, a creaking floorboard. She turned quickly, her breath catching in her throat, but found only darkness. Shaking her head, she took a step back, bumping into a table. The photographs rattled, and she felt a surge of panic. Quickly, she left the room, her mind racing with the implications of what she had seen. Late that night, while cleaning the kitchen, Anna's thoughts drifted back to the locked trunk she had discovered in the attic. There was something compelling about it, an urge to find out what lay within its confines. She worked diligently, the rhythmic sound of her cleaning tools echoing through the quiet house. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the attic, breaking the stillness of the night. Anna froze, her heart racing as she exchanged the comfort of her chores for the chilling unknown. She tiptoed toward the sound, her pulse quickening with each step. As she reached the attic door, she gasped in horror. The locked trunk, which had once been firmly shut, was now wide open, its contents scattered across the floor like forgotten memories. Old dresses, a tarnished locket, and crumpled letters lay strewn about, the remnants of a life once lived. Anna knelt down, her hands trembling as she picked up a faded photograph of a young woman. The striking resemblance to Clara was unmistakable. The woman smiled, but her eyes held a depth of sorrow that sent shivers down Anna's spine. She glanced around, feeling an oppressive weight in the air, as if the very walls of the mansion were watching her. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the empty room, feeling the shadows closing in around her. In that moment, the atmosphere thickened, and she could almost hear the echoes of past cries for help reverberating through the silence. A cold breeze swept past her, and she shivered, realizing she was not alone. The mansion felt alive, a vessel of grief and despair, and Anna knew she was standing on the precipice of something terrifying. With a renewed sense of urgency, she gathered the items from the floor, her mind racing with questions. What had happened to Clara? Why did the photographs hold such fear? As she collected the remnants of the past, the urgency to uncover the truth pulsed through her veins, but so did the dread of what she might find. Anna stood in the dim light of the attic, her heart racing as she clutched the locket she had found among the scattered remnants of the trunk. The delicate gold piece glinted softly in her palm, but it was the photograph tucked inside that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a picture of the previous maid, Clara, smiling with a warmth that seemed to transcend time. Anna felt an inexplicable connection to the woman, a bond forged in shared suffering and unspoken truths. The locket was a symbol of Clara's existence, a tangible link to the mystery that loomed over the mansion like a dark cloud. Determined to seek answers, Anna descended the creaking staircase and found Lucas in the study, poring over documents with a furrowed brow. The air was thick with tension, and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls. Gathering her courage, Anna stepped forward, the locket resting heavily in her pocket. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk?" He looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "Of course, Anna. What's on your mind?" But there was an edge to his tone, an undercurrent of something unspoken. Anna took a deep breath. "I found something in the attic, something that belonged to Clara." She paused, gauging his reaction. "A locket. It had her picture in it, and I think I need to know what happened to her." The moment her words hung in the air, Lucas's expression shifted. The warmth faded, replaced by a cold, hard gaze. I think it's best if you leave the past alone, Anna. It's not something you should concern yourself with. Why not? Anna pressed, her heart pounding. Clara deserves to be remembered. She deserves justice. Lucas's jaw tightened and he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. You don't understand. Some things are better left buried. Trust me. Anna felt a chill run down her spine at his intensity. But I need to understand. She was here, she was real, and she disappeared. What are you hiding? Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. I said leave it alone. His voice echoed through the study, and for a moment, Anna felt as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. Why are you so defensive? She shot back, her own anger flaring. What happened between the two of you? He took a step back, his expression softening momentarily. It's complicated. Clara was a part of our lives, but her story is not one you want to unravel. Before Anna could respond, the room was filled with an eerie silence, as if the very air held its breath. She could feel the weight of his warning pressing down on her, but her resolve only hardened. I won't stop looking for the truth, she declared, turning on her heel to leave. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Anna's heart raced. She felt compelled to return to the garden, where shadows danced in the twilight. The moon cast silvery beams, illuminating the once beautiful flowers that now seemed to wilt under the weight of the mansion's secrets. As she wandered deeper into the garden, a sudden chill enveloped her, sending shivers down her spine. She could feel an unseen presence lingering just beyond her sight. It was as if the very essence of Clara was watching, urging her to dig deeper, to seek the truth that had been buried for far too long. Clara? Anna whispered into the night, her voice trembling. Are you here? In response, the wind rustled through the leaves, and for a fleeting moment, Anna thought she saw a figure out of the corner of her eye, dark, shadowy, and fleeting. She turned, desperately seeking the source, but found nothing but the rustling branches and the distant sounds of the night. Her heart raced as she stepped back, her pulse quickening. I'm not afraid, she declared into the darkness, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I will find out what happened to you. But as she stood there, a heavy dread settled in her stomach. She felt the shadows closing in, and the laughter of the couple echoed in her mind. They were hiding more than just memories. They were guarding secrets that could shatter her understanding of the world she had entered. Unbeknownst to Anna, the mansion itself seemed to breathe around her, its walls thick with the weight of its past. The shadows lengthened, and somewhere, deep within the bowels of the house, a whisper echoed, a call for help that only she could hear. She was now a part of Clara's story, and the night was just beginning to unfold its chilling narrative. Under the pale glow of the moonlight, Anna felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins as she stood before the locked door that had taunted her since her arrival. Her heart raced in anticipation, and she took a deep breath, steadying herself against the creeping dread that had become so familiar. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, as if it held its breath, waiting for her next move. She jiggled the handle, praying it would yield to her desperate need for answers. With a soft creak, the door swung open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with dust-covered furniture and cobwebs that hung like shrouds over forgotten memories. Anna stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight, and her eyes widened at the sight before her. Stacked against the walls were boxes overflowing with old garments, and in the center of the room stood a solitary desk, its surface littered with yellowing papers. She could feel an electric charge in the air, a sense of urgency pushing her to uncover the secrets hidden within these walls. As she rifled through the papers, she stumbled upon more diaries, Clara's diaries. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, detailing a life marred by fear and betrayal. Anna's hands trembled as she read aloud, her voice a mere whisper in the stillness. I cannot remain a prisoner in this house. Lucas is kind, but Mariana, she watches me with eyes full of malice. I fear for my life. Each entry was a chilling testament to Clara's suffering, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lay beneath the mansion's facade. Suddenly, The door creaked open, and Anna's heart dropped. Mariana stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury, eyes blazing like embers. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice dripped with venom, cutting through the tension like a knife. Anna felt the weight of the truth pressing down on her, but she stood her ground, clutching the diaries to her chest like a shield. "I'm uncovering the truth, Mariana. Clara wasn't just a maid, she was a victim of your cruelty," Anna replied, her voice steady despite the tremors coursing through her. "You can't hide it anymore." Mariana stepped forward, a predatory gleam in her eye. "You have no idea what you're meddling with. Clara tried to escape, and she paid the price. You think you're any different?" Her voice lowered, dripping with menace. "You should leave while you still can." Anna felt a chill run down her spine, but the gravity of the situation fueled her resolve. "I won't let you intimidate me. Clara's fate is tied to this house, and I won't let her story be buried with you." With a sudden movement, Mariana lunged for Anna, but she was quicker, bolting past her and into the hallway. Panic surged within her as she raced through the mansion, the echoes of her footsteps reverberating against the cold walls. Behind her, she could hear Mariana's furious shouts, but she didn't dare look back. The truth weighed heavily on her shoulders, pushing her onward. Bursting through the front door, Anna collapsed onto the manicured lawn, gasping for breath. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, but the weight of fear still loomed over her. She glanced back at the mansion, its windows dark and foreboding, yet she felt a strange sense of liberation. The truth was out there now, hidden in the diaries she clutched tightly, and she would not allow Clara's voice to be silenced any longer. As she stumbled into the night, the shadows danced around her, whispering secrets that had long been concealed. Anna's heart raced, each thump echoing the pulse of a life that was intertwined with Clara's. She was no longer just a domestic worker. She was a vessel for the truth, a flame that would ignite the darkness shrouding the mansion's past. But as she made her way down the winding path, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was watching her, waiting for her return. A chill crept up her spine, and she knew that this was only the beginning of a confrontation that would unravel the very fabric of the lives entwined within those walls. The night was far from over, and the shadows were not done with her yet. The air was thick with unease, as Anna stood at the entrance of the mansion once more, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. The moon cast an eerie glow over the opulent facade, illuminating the intricate carvings that adorned the door. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation that lay ahead. The secrets that had haunted her since her arrival were now a weight she could no longer bear. She stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing her resolve. "Lucas, Mariana," she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The silence that followed was deafening, an oppressive reminder of the ghosts that lingered in the mansion. She moved cautiously through the grand hallway, her eyes scanning for any sign of her employers. She could feel the shadows pressing against her, as if the house itself was warning her to turn back. Suddenly, she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. A moment later, Lucas emerged from the shadows, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Anna, what are you doing here at this hour?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I need to talk to you, Lucas. It's about Clara," she stated, her voice unwavering. The mention of Clara's name sent a flicker of emotion across Lucas's face. Regret? Longing? "You shouldn't be asking about her," he replied, his tone suddenly cold. "It's better if you forget." "But I can't," Anna insisted, her determination flaring. "I've found things, terrible things. You need to tell me the truth." Before Lucas could respond, Mariana appeared, her face pale and drawn. "What's this about Clara?" she interjected, her voice laced with a sharp edge. "You've been digging into things that don't concern you, Anna. I know what happened to her. I know she was your maid, but she was also a person with dreams and hopes, and you took that away from her." Anna's voice rose, fueled by the pain of the truth she had uncovered. At that, Lucas's demeanor shifted. "You don't understand," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. "I loved Clara. I thought she loved me too, but Mariana, she couldn't accept it. Her jealousy drove her to madness." Mariana's eyes blazed with fury. "You dare speak her name?" I did what I had to do to protect what was mine." She stepped closer to Anna, her presence suffocating. "You're treading on dangerous ground, girl." Anna felt a chill run down her spine, a sense of impending doom hanging in the air. "What happened to Clara? Tell me what you did." Suddenly, the floorboards creaked ominously beneath them, as if the house itself was groaning in disapproval. A cold gust of wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the flickering candlelight and plunging them into darkness. Anna's heart raced, and she could feel the weight of Clara's spirit pressing down on them, her presence palpable. "Clara tried to escape," Lucas confessed, his voice shaking. "Mariana, she couldn't let her go. It was an accident, I swear. But it was too late. Clara was gone, and I was left with the guilt." Mariana laughed bitterly, her eyes wild. "You think I'm the monster here? I loved you, Lucas. I did what I had to do to protect our life. Clara was a threat to everything we built. Is that what you call it? Love?" Anna spat back, her anger igniting. "You're both monsters. You've trapped this poor girl in your web of lies and deceit, and now her spirit is haunting you." At that moment, a chilling wail echoed through the hall, reverberating off the walls, as if Clara herself was crying out for justice. The air turned frigid, and Anna could see a shadow flickering at the edges of her vision, growing darker and more defined. It was Clara, her ghostly figure emerging from the shadows, eyes filled with sorrow and rage. "Clara!" Anna cried out, reaching toward the apparition. "I'm here for you!" But Clara's gaze shifted to Lucas and Mariana, a look of betrayal etched on her ethereal face. As she floated closer, the very foundations of the mansion began to tremble. "You took my life," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves. "Now you will pay." In that moment, the reality of the past crashed down upon them, and Anna realized that the cycle of horror and despair would not be easily broken. The mansion itself seemed to echo Clara's plea for vengeance, a place where the dark secrets of love, jealousy, and betrayal entwined in a deadly dance. As the shadows closed in, Anna felt a sense of foreboding. No one would escape unscathed from the horrors that had been unleashed. Rosa hurriedly stepped through the grand entrance of the Martins' home, a place she had cleaned and tended for years. The opulence of the foyer, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, usually filled her with a sense of pride. Today, however, a chill ran down her spine as the heavy oak door creaked shut behind her, almost as if it were sealing her inside against her will. An unsettling silence enveloped the house, an eerie contrast to the usual sounds of laughter and chatter that echoed through its halls. She glanced at the ornate grandfather clock that stood in the corner, its hands frozen at 12, an odd sight that deepened her sense of foreboding. "Strange," she muttered to herself, brushing her dark hair back with a trembling hand. "Where is everyone?" With a sigh, she tucked her apron around her waist and set about her chores. But the disarray around her caught her attention. Personal items littered the floor. A child's toy car lay forgotten beneath the coffee table, and a jacket hung haphazardly over a chair. The family must have left in a hurry, she thought, her heart racing at the possibilities. Perhaps they had a last-minute trip or an emergency. But as she moved deeper into the house, the stillness only intensified her unease. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence swallowed her words, leaving her feeling small and vulnerable. She made her way to the kitchen, where the scent of stale food lingered in the air, hinting that no one had prepared a meal in days. Rosa frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. It wasn't like the Martins to neglect their home so carelessly. As she scrubbed the dishes, her thoughts drifted. The Martins had always been kind to her, treating her more like family than a mere housekeeper. But today, everything felt wrong. An inexplicable heaviness pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She shook off the feeling as she moved on to dusting the living room, her hands gliding over the fine furniture, but her mind remained elsewhere. Then, a sound broke the stillness, a faint whisper that seemed to drift down from the upper floors. Rosa's heart skipped a beat. "Is someone there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer came, only the creaking of the house settling around her. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and dread, she set down her dustcloth and made her way toward the staircase. The staircase was grand, with a polished banister that gleamed under the soft light filtering through the windows. Each step felt heavier than the last as she climbed, her senses heightened. The whispered voice beckoned her, pulling her closer to the second floor. It's probably just the wind, she tried to convince herself, but her instincts warned her otherwise. At the top of the stairs she hesitated, staring down the dimly lit hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Shadows danced along the walls, playing tricks on her mind. I should just go back, she thought, but her feet moved forward, drawn to the source of the sound. As she approached the master bedroom door, her heart raced, pounding in her ears like a war drum. Rosa? The whisper echoed again, softer this time, almost pleading. She paused, her hand hovering above the doorknob, uncertainty flooding her. It's just my imagination, she whispered to herself, trying to summon the courage to open the door. But the chilling sensation of being watched prickled at her skin, urging her to turn back. With a deep breath, she grasped the knob and turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in shadows. The air felt thick, carrying an odd scent that made her stomach churn, something like decay. She stepped inside, her curiosity outweighing her fear, but the room was empty, the lavish furniture untouched. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell upon a photograph hanging on the wall. The Martins smiled brightly in the picture, but behind them lingered a shadowy figure, its features indistinguishable. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. An instinctual sense of danger surged through her veins. She took a step back, the weight of the house pressing down on her, and the whisper echoed in her mind, compelling her to discover the truth hidden within these walls. As Rosa ascended the staircase, each step seemed to amplify the unsettling silence that enveloped the Martins' home. The plush carpet underfoot felt alien, and the ornate wooden banister was cold against her palm. She paused briefly at the top, her heart racing as she glanced toward the closed door of the master bedroom. A weight pressed against her chest, as if the house itself were warning her to turn back. Taking a deep breath, she mustered her courage and pushed the door open. The hinges creaked ominously, and she stepped inside, her senses heightened. The room was immaculate, yet devoid of life. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, casting eerie shadows across the room. The air was thick, tinged with an unsettling scent that reminded her of damp earth and forgotten memories. Rosa's gaze swept across the elegant furnishings, an ornate four-poster bed, a polished mahogany dresser, and a plush armchair tucked into a corner. But it was the photograph on the wall that captured her attention. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. The image depicted the Martins, Mr. and Mrs. Martin, smiling broadly, their children beaming with joy. Yet, lurking in the background was a shadowy figure, barely discernible, its presence sending a shiver down her spine. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely escaping her lips. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she instinctively took a step back, her mind racing. The figure seemed to watch her, its eyes hollow, a spectral reminder of secrets long buried. Just as she turned to leave, a chill swept through the room, causing the hair on her arms to stand on end. Rosa's instincts screamed at her to escape, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She glanced back at the photograph, her mind grappling with the mystery it presented. There was something deeply unsettling about the image, a sense of foreboding that tightened around her like a vice. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light," she muttered, trying to rationalize the unease that had settled in her bones. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as though the very walls were alive, absorbing her fear. As she stepped towards the door, determined to leave the haunted space behind, she caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. The shadow in the photograph seemed to shift, and her heart raced anew. No, this isn't right," she whispered, panic rising once more. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound from downstairs, a soft creaking that echoed through the stillness. It was as if the house itself were groaning under the weight of its secrets. She hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the instinct to investigate. "Perhaps the family is back," she reasoned aloud, But even as she said it, doubt crept in. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Taking a deep breath, she turned back toward the door, her resolve faltering. Just as she placed her hand on the doorknob, a sudden chill swept through the room, making her shiver involuntarily. The feeling of dread intensified, and she felt an inexplicable urge to look back one last time. The photograph seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the shadowy figure growing sharper, more defined. "What do you want from me?" Rosa asked, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on her like a weight. Feeling the walls close in, she yanked the door open and stepped back into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The house felt even more oppressive now, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the curtains amplifying her anxiety. She hurried down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The sense of unease clung to her, tightening its grip as she descended the stairs. Each step felt like a descent into a deeper darkness, the once familiar home now a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. "Rosa!" a voice called from the depths of her memory. It was her mother's voice, a soothing presence amid the chaos. "Stay strong, Mihija. Trust yourself." The words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the strength she had to carry on. But the shadows of the Martins' home were relentless, pulling her into their depths, where secrets festered and dangers lurked, waiting for her to uncover the truth. Rosa stood at the top of the basement stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The house felt oppressively silent, the kind of stillness that made every creak of the floorboards sound like a whispering ghost. She took a deep breath, willing herself to step down into the darkness below. The faint smell of mold and damp air enveloped her as she descended, the dim light from above barely illuminating her path. At the bottom she paused, glancing around. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes stacked haphazardly, remnants of a life once vibrant, now forgotten. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through a small window near the ceiling. Rosa squinted, her instincts telling her something was amiss. She had never ventured down here before, but an inexplicable pull urged her forward. As she navigated through the maze of boxes, she spotted a particularly old stack pushed against the far wall. There was something peculiar about it, as if it concealed a secret. Curiosity ignited within her, and she began to clear a path, her fingers brushing against the worn cardboard until she uncovered a door set into the wall. It was half hidden, the paint chipped and peeling. Could this be it? She murmured to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment as a wave of apprehension washed over her. What could lie behind it? But the thought of the missing housekeeper, the one whose belongings she might discover, spurred her on. With a determined twist, she opened the door. Inside, the air was thick with a musty scent, and Rosa stepped into a small room that felt frozen in time. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with trinkets, photographs, and old cleaning supplies, all covered in a layer of dust. A chill ran down her spine as she noticed a framed photo on the wall, the previous housekeeper, smiling brightly, surrounded by a family that looked so familiar. But there was something wrong. The eyes of the housekeeper seemed to plead for help, a silent scream captured in the photograph. As she stepped closer, she noticed the items scattered around the room: a pair of delicate earrings, a faded diary, and a small porcelain doll. Each item told a story, whispering the secrets of a life that had once been filled with laughter and love, now overshadowed by mystery. Rosa picked up the diary, its cover worn and cracked. She opened it carefully, eager to uncover the thoughts of the woman who had come before her. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, detailing mundane daily tasks, but as she flipped through, the tone shifted. The entries grew darker, filled with notes about strange occurrences in the house, whispers in the night, and the feeling of being watched. The last entry sent a shiver down her spine. "I fear I am not alone in this house. I must leave before it's too late." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above, jolting Rosa back to reality. Her heart raced as the sound reverberated through the basement. The tranquility of the room shattered. "What was that?" she gasped, her voice trembling. Panic gripped her, and she dropped the diary, the pages fluttering like trapped birds, scattering across the floor. She bolted for the door, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. The image of the previous housekeeper's pleading eyes haunted her as she ascended the stairs 2 at a time, desperation fueling her speed. The basement felt like a trap, a sinister realm that had held secrets too long, and she could no longer ignore the sense of dread that enveloped her. "Please let it be nothing," she whispered to herself as she reached the top, her breath coming in quick gasps. The house was still, the silence now oppressive, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Rosa turned towards the living room, her instincts screaming for her to get out, to find safety. "Mr. and Mrs. Martin?" she called, her voice echoing back at her, swallowed by the stillness. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she strained to hear any response, but only the silence answered her. The weight of the house's secrets pressed down on her, and as she looked around, the feeling of being watched returned, a cold shiver creeping up her spine. "Hello?" she shouted, her voice tinged with anxiety, but the emptiness of the house consumed her words. The unsettling quiet felt alive, and in that moment she realized she was no longer the caretaker. She was the one in need of care, trapped in a web woven by the very people she was meant to serve. Rosa's heart raced as she stumbled back upstairs, the echo of the crash still ringing in her ears. She reached the main floor, the atmosphere thick with an unsettling stillness that clung to her like a heavy fog. The front door stood wide open, its frame silhouetted against the dim light of the late afternoon sun. A gust of wind swept through the house, rustling the curtains and sending a shiver down her spine. The unsettling silence was broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. "Mr. Martins? Mrs. Martins?" Rosa called out, her voice trembling as it bounced off the walls. "Is anyone home?" The only answer was the whisper of the wind and the distant rustle of leaves outside. An anxious knot formed in her stomach as she peered into the shadowy corners of the room, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. As she stood there, trying to gather her thoughts, a flicker of movement caught her eye. It was brief, just a shadow slipping past the doorframe leading to the hallway. Rosa's breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively took a step back, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. "Hello?" she called again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The emptiness of the house suffocated her, and every instinct urged her to retreat. But curiosity, mingled with a fierce determination, pulled her closer to the source of the movement. She took a tentative step toward the hallway, her senses heightened, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The cool breeze brushed against her skin, sending a chill through her body. Rosa was no stranger to the Martins' home, having worked there for years, but today felt different, dangerously so. As she reached the threshold, she hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts of the previous housekeeper's disappearance. "Get a grip, Rosa," she muttered to herself, shaking her head as if that would dispel the tension coiling within her. She stepped into the hallway, the floor creaking beneath her weight. She could feel her pulse quicken, a primal instinct warning her of the unseen threat that loomed just out of sight. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light," she reassured herself, glancing back toward the open front door. The sunlight poured in, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. But the sense of being watched lingered, a prickling sensation that crawled up her spine. Just as she was about to turn back, another flicker of movement darted across her vision, this time more pronounced. Rosa spun around, eyes wide, searching for the source. "Hello?" she called again, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "Is anyone there?" Silence enveloped her once more, thick and suffocating. Rosa felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. The house, once a place of routine and predictability, had transformed into a labyrinth of unease. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered, trying to convince herself. Yet, as she stood in the hallway, the feeling of dread intensified. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in around her, and she could no longer tell if it was her imagination or something more sinister. The house had secrets, dark and twisted, and she was beginning to feel the weight of them pressing down on her. With a deep breath, she turned toward the living room, drawn by an unexplainable compulsion. As she stepped forward, the air grew colder, and the silence deepened, wrapping around her like a shroud. She could almost hear the faint whispers of the past, echoing through the walls, warning her to turn back. Just then, a soft sound drifted through the air, like a child's laughter echoing from the depths of the house. Rosa froze, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She was certain she had heard it, a sweet, carefree giggle that seemed out of place in the oppressive atmosphere. "Is someone there?" she asked, her voice trembling. But the only response was the unsettling silence, stretching out before her like a dark abyss. Rosa's instincts screamed at her to leave, to run through the open door and never look back. Yet the curiosity entwined with fear held her captive, urging her to take another step into the unknown, despite the warnings that echoed in her mind. "Maybe it's just the wind," she murmured to herself. Yet even as she spoke, doubt clawed at her. The laughter lingered in her ears, drawing her further into the shadows, deeper into the heart of the Martins' home, where secrets lay hidden, waiting to be unveiled. Panic surged through Rosa as she bolted toward the front door, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Just as her fingers brushed the cool handle, the door slammed shut with a resounding thud, reverberating through the empty house. The sound echoed in her ears, drowning out the whispers of fear that clawed at her mind. She stumbled back, her breath hitching in her throat as the reality of her entrapment sank in. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head in disbelief. Desperate for an escape, she spun around, surveying the opulent yet suffocating surroundings. The polished marble floors felt cold beneath her feet, a stark contrast to the warmth of the sun that had once bathed the home in light. She raced through the entrance hall, her eyes darting toward the windows, but they were locked tight, a barrier that seemed to mock her desperation. "Why is this happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling as panic threatened to overwhelm her. Rosa's fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone, praying for a signal. The screen flickered, displaying the dreaded "no service" message. "Great," she scoffed bitterly, tossing the device back into her pocket. The oppressive silence pressed down on her, amplifying the sound of her racing heart. Outside, the family's car sat untouched in the driveway, a silent testament to their sudden departure. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, threatening to consume her whole. Just as she was about to collapse against the wall, a sound drifted through the air. A soft, innocent giggle that seemed to come from the living room. It was sweet and carefree, a stark contrast to the tension that wrapped around her like a vice. For a fleeting moment, curiosity sparked within her, momentarily overshadowing her fear. "A child?" she whispered, instinctively drawn toward the sound. "Is anyone there?" With hesitant steps, she made her way into the living room, her heart racing with a mix of fear and intrigue. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight against the outside world. As she stepped inside, the laughter echoed again, light and airy. "Hello?" she called, her voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Rosa felt a chill run down her spine, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was waiting for her. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes scanning the room. The plush furniture loomed like silent sentinels, watching her every move. In the corner, a shadow flickered momentarily, but when she turned her head, it vanished like smoke. "Maybe it's just my imagination," she murmured, forcing herself to remain calm. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to escape the house, but the allure of that childlike laughter was intoxicating. She stepped deeper into the room, her breath quickening as the air grew heavier. "Where are you?" she asked softly, half hoping for an answer, half fearing what it might be. The silence was suffocating, wrapping around her like a thick fog. Just as she was about to retreat, the laughter rang out once more, this time closer, almost within reach. It was playful yet haunting, echoing off the walls and wrapping around her mind. Rosa's heart thumped in her chest as she turned toward the source of the sound. "I'm coming," she called, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Please, just show yourself." She felt like a moth drawn to a flame, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. As she stepped further into the room, the atmosphere shifted. The walls seemed to close in around her, and the laughter morphed into a chilling melody that sent shivers down her spine. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog of dread that clouded her thoughts. "This isn't right," she whispered, the realization dawning on her like a slow, dreadful wave. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and she felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over her. "No," Rosa breathed, her instincts screaming at her to flee. But before she could retreat, she heard a light thud behind her, as if something had shifted in the house. Whirling around, her heart raced as the shadows deepened, and an eerie stillness descended upon the room, leaving her standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between the comforting familiarity of her life and the terrifying unknown that awaited her. Rosa stepped hesitantly into the living room, her heart pounding with both fear and curiosity. The space, usually vibrant and filled with the sounds of laughter and family interactions, was now shrouded in an oppressive silence. The curtains fluttered with an unseen breeze, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. It was then that she saw her, a ghostly figure standing by the fireplace, translucent and shimmering in the dim light. "Rosa," the apparition whispered, her voice a soft echo that seemed to resonate from another world. "I've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" Rosa stammered, instinctively taking a step back. She felt a chill in the air, as if the temperature had dropped significantly with the ghost's arrival. "I am Clara, the housekeeper before you," the spirit replied, her eyes filled with a sorrowful understanding. "I tried to warn you, but you didn't listen. The Martins are not what they seem." Rosa's mind raced. "What do you mean? They're good people. They've always treated me well." But deep down, doubt began to creep into her thoughts, a sense of foreboding that she could no longer ignore. Clara's form flickered, as if the very essence of her being was struggling to maintain coherence. "They're charming, yes, but beneath that facade lies something dark. I was here to protect you, to ensure you didn't fall into the same trap I did." "Trap? What trap?" Rosa's voice trembled, her instincts urging her to flee, yet she felt compelled to hear more. "Their kindness is a mask, Rosa. They took me in, just as they did with you, but it wasn't out of generosity. They needed someone to keep their secrets, someone to clean up after their messes. When I found out too much, they—" Clara paused, her expression turning grave. "They made me disappear." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, wrapping around Rosa and squeezing the breath from her lungs. "You're saying they killed you?" Clara nodded slowly, her face a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "Not in the way you think. They don't need to use violence. They trap you in fear, in loyalty, and when you're too far gone, they simply let you fade away, just like I did." Rosa's heart sank at the realization. "But I can't stay here. I have to leave." She turned towards the door, but before she could take a step, she felt the temperature drop even further, accompanied by a sudden gust of wind that sent shivers down her spine. "Rosa," Clara's voice echoed, filled with urgency. "You must listen. They're coming for you." Just then, the room was filled with the sound of footsteps, and Rosa felt a wave of dread wash over her. She turned slowly, her heart racing as she faced the Martins, who stood at the entrance with expressions that twisted into sinister grins. Their eyes seemed to glimmer with a malevolent light, and an overwhelming sense of doom settled over her. "Welcome back, Rosa," Mr. Martin said, his voice smooth yet chilling. "We missed you." "Don't listen to her," Mrs. Martin added, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Clara was always too sensitive. She just couldn't handle the responsibilities." "What responsibilities?" Rosa demanded, her voice a mixture of defiance and fear. "What did you do to her?" Mr. Martin stepped forward, his smile widening. "She was a good worker, but she became a liability, just like you can become one, dear Rosa. We can't have loose ends." Rosa felt her throat tighten, her body frozen in place as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. Clara's warning echoed in her mind. She was trapped, just like the woman before her, ensnared by the very people she had trusted and served. "No," she breathed, shaking her head as panic surged through her veins. "I won't let this happen." But as she attempted to retreat, the space around her warped, the walls closing in as if the house itself was reacting to her fear. The Martins advanced, their smiles unwavering, but their eyes cold and devoid of empathy. "Rosa," Clara's voice rang out one last time, a desperate plea from the beyond. "You are not alone. Fight!" But the darkness enveloped Rosa, and with it, the chilling realization sank in. She was now bound to this place, destined to share the same fate as Clara, living forever in the shadows of a house that had turned into a prison. The Martins' laughter echoed in her ears as she felt herself slip into despair, the last remnants of her hope extinguished. Louisa stepped out of the cab and paused, taking a moment to absorb the imposing structure that loomed before her. Casa Almeida was a grand old mansion, its weathered stone facade adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of a time long past. Ivy climbed up the walls, clinging to the remnants of the once vibrant paint that now peeled away like memories fading into oblivion. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. As she approached the heavy oak door, Louisa felt a shiver trail down her spine. She brushed it off, convincing herself it was merely the chill of the autumn air. The door creaked open, revealing a well-lit foyer that contrasted sharply with the somber exterior. There, standing with warm yet oddly distant smiles, were Mr. and Mrs. Almeida. "Welcome, dear," Mrs. Almeida said, her voice smooth and melodic, yet carrying an edge that Louisa couldn't quite place. "We're so glad to have you here." "Thank you, ma'am," Louisa replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "I'm excited to start." Mr. Almeida nodded, his expression inscrutable as he motioned for her to enter. Come in. We have much to discuss." As Louisa stepped inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being scrutinized by unseen eyes. The interior was just as grand as the exterior, with high ceilings and elegant chandeliers casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floors. But there was something that felt off, an almost oppressive atmosphere that made her heart race. "Your room is just down the hall," Mrs. Almeida said, gesturing towards a corridor lined with portraits. "You'll find everything you need there. Please make yourself at home." Louisa nodded, grateful for the guidance. She turned to leave, but paused at a door halfway down the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and a chill seemed to seep from the crack. Her curiosity piqued. She hesitated, glancing back at the Almeidas. They were engaged in quiet conversation, their voices low, but she caught a glimpse of Mr. Almeida's stern expression as he glanced towards the door. "Is that room occupied?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Almeida's smile faltered for a brief moment before she quickly recovered. "Oh, that's just a storage room. Nothing of interest, I assure you. Best to stay away from it." Louisa felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Of course, let's not dwell on that," Mr. Almeida interjected, his tone shifting to a more commanding one. "You have your tasks to focus on, dear. The house requires your attention." As she retreated to her designated room, Louisa couldn't shake the feeling that there was something sinister lurking just beyond that door. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thoughts as she settled into her new surroundings. The room was cozy enough, with a large bed and a small dresser, but the soft light filtering through the curtained window did little to lighten her growing unease. That night, as Louisa lay in bed, sleep eluded her. The house creaked and groaned as if it were alive, whispering secrets in the dark. She tossed and turned, finally dozing off, only to be jolted awake by the sound of hushed voices echoing through the hallways. They were indistinct, like a distant conversation just out of reach, weaving in and out of her consciousness. "Why can't you just forget?" a voice hissed, tinged with desperation. "I can't let her go," another voice replied, filled with sorrow. Louisa's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Was she dreaming? The whispers swirled around her, growing louder, urging her to listen. She clutched the blankets, willing herself to dismiss them as figments of her imagination. Yet, deep down, a part of her recognized that these were not mere tricks of the mind. As the night wore on, the sounds faded, but the feeling of dread clung to her like a shadow. The locked room, the whispers, the Almeidas' enigmatic smiles, all of it swirled in her mind as she struggled to maintain her sanity. What secrets lay hidden within the walls of Casa Almeida? And why did it feel as though she had stepped into a world where the past was not quite finished with its hold on the present? As the sun began to rise over Casa Almeida, casting long shadows through the ornate windows, Luisa found herself dusting the family portrait that leaned against the wall in the grand hallway. The painting, shrouded in a thick layer of dust, depicted Mr. and Mrs. Almeida in their prime, standing proudly beside a young girl with striking features. The girl's dark hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her bright eyes seemed to follow Luisa as she worked. There was an unsettling familiarity about the girl, a resemblance that sent shivers down Luisa's spine. "Isn't she beautiful?" a voice broke through Luisa's thoughts. She turned to find Mrs. Almeida standing behind her, her expression a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. "Yes, she is," Luisa replied cautiously, trying to gauge the mood. "She looks so much like you." "Ah, yes," Mrs. Almeida whispered, her gaze fixed on the portrait. "That was a long time ago, before everything changed." Luisa felt a knot form in her stomach, sensing a story buried beneath the surface of Mrs. Almeida's words. She wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but the shadow in Mrs. Almeida's eyes silenced her. Instead, she resumed dusting, her mind racing with questions. Later that afternoon, as Luisa meticulously cleaned the library, she overheard muffled voices coming from the adjacent room. Curiosity piqued. She moved closer to the door, straining to hear. "I told you to stop bringing it up." Mr. Almeida's voice rose, filled with anger. "We agreed to forget." "How can you say that?" Mrs. Almeida shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. "She deserves to be remembered. We can't just pretend she never existed." Luisa's heart raced as she pressed her ear against the door. The tension in their voices was palpable, a storm brewing behind closed doors. "Every time you mention her, I feel like I'm losing you all over again." Mr. Almeida's voice softened, but the pain was evident. "It's better this way, for both of us." "Better for you," Mrs. Almeida spat out, her voice breaking. "You can't keep running from the truth, Gabriel. It will consume you." With that, silence fell. Luisa stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The argument had revealed more than she had anticipated, and a sense of dread washed over her. What truth lay hidden in this house? Determined to uncover more, Luisa returned to her tasks, her mind racing with implications. Later, while sorting through dusty shelves in the library, she stumbled upon an old, leather-bound diary wedged between two large volumes. The cover was cracked, and with a hesitant hand, she opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with elegant cursive handwriting. As she read, her breath hitched. The entries spoke of a tragic accident, a car crash that had taken the life of a young girl, the daughter of the Almeidas. The words painted a vivid picture of a family shattered by grief, unable to move past their loss. "Why didn't they ever talk about it?" Luisa muttered to herself, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls could hear her. "It's like they're trapped in this never-ending sorrow." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the library, making her jump. She quickly closed the diary and placed it back on the shelf, her heart racing. "Luisa, there you are," Mrs. Almeida said, her voice bright yet strained. "I hope you're not working too hard." "Just tidying up," Luisa replied, forcing a smile. "I found some old books that need organizing." "Good, good," Mrs. Almeida nodded, but her eyes darted to the shelf where the diary had been. "Just don't dig too deep into things that don't concern you." "Of course," Luisa said, feeling a chill creep up her spine. The warning hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. As the day faded into twilight, Luisa found herself reflecting on the fragmentary glimpses of the Almeida family's past. The argument, the diary, and the portrait had woven a tapestry of sorrow that enveloped Casa Almeida, a house that was not merely a home, but a crypt of memories. "Why can't they let go?" she whispered to herself, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the library table. The shadows lengthened, the air thickening with unspoken words. Luisa felt the weight of the house's history pressing down on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the brink of something dark and dangerous. As Luisa continued her daily routine in Casa Almeida, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once, convinced that unseen eyes were watching her. While dusting the elaborate chandeliers in the grand dining room, she felt a sudden chill pass through her. It was as if a draft had swept in from nowhere, raising goosebumps along her arms. She paused, looking around, but the room remained eerily still. "Just the wind," she murmured to herself, shaking her head in an attempt to dispel her growing unease. Yet, as she moved deeper into the house, the sensations intensified. Objects began to shift ever so slightly on their own, a vase tilting precariously on the edge of a table, or a book falling from its shelf without explanation. Each incident sent a shiver down her spine, and her heart raced with a mix of fear and intrigue. One evening, after completing her chores, Louisa stood in front of a large, ornate mirror in the hallway. The reflection stared back at her, but then something caught her eye. As she leaned closer, she gasped, taking a step back. For a fleeting moment, she saw the faint outline of a woman behind her, the same woman from the family portrait. The apparition seemed to reach out, her expression one of sorrow and longing. Louisa blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving only her own startled reflection staring back. "What is happening to me?" she whispered, clutching the edge of the vanity for support. She felt as though the walls of the Casa Almeida were closing in on her, suffocating her with their secrets. Desperate for answers, she decided to confront Mrs. Almeida. The woman had always been polite yet distant, her eyes flickering with a guarded intensity whenever Louisa entered a room. That night, after dinner, Louisa mustered her courage and found Mrs. Almeida in the parlor, her fingers delicately brushing over a collection of porcelain figurines. "Mrs. Almeida?" Louisa began, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman turned, her expression unreadable. "Yes, dear," she replied, her tone a mix of warmth and wariness. I wanted to ask you about the locked room in the hallway," Louisa stuttered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Why is it kept locked? What's inside?" A chill swept through the room, and Mrs. Almeida's demeanor shifted. The warmth in her eyes faded, replaced by a cold, steely gaze. "You should not concern yourself with that room, Louisa. It's best left undisturbed." "But I can't help but feel there's something important there," Louisa pressed, her curiosity igniting a defiance within her. "I've heard things. Strange noises." "Enough!" Mrs. Almeida's voice rose, sharp as glass. "Do not speak of things you do not understand. There are secrets in this house that are better left buried." Louisa recoiled at the sudden intensity of the woman's warning, the weight of it settling heavily in the air between them. "I'm just trying to understand," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Understanding can lead to dangers beyond what you can imagine," Mrs. Almeida replied, her expression softening slightly, but the underlying threat remained. "Please, I insist you drop this matter. Your position here depends on it." Feeling dismissed, Louisa turned away, her mind racing. She had not expected such a fierce response. The locked room now loomed larger in her thoughts, a dark puzzle waiting to be solved. The house felt different that night, as though it was alive with whispers, secrets swirling just out of reach. As she lay in bed, her dreams were haunted by visions of the ghostly figure she had seen in the mirror, its face a mirror of both despair and longing. The next day, as she dusted the shelves in the library, Louisa's resolve strengthened. She found herself glancing at the door of the locked room, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. What lay behind that door? What truth did the Almeidas hide? She knew she couldn't walk away from this mystery. The shadows of Casa Almeida were pulling her deeper into their tangled web, and she felt an unshakable urge to uncover the truth. Louisa lay in bed, her heart racing as the storm outside raged on, lightning illuminating the room in flashes that seemed to echo the turmoil in her mind. The nightmares had become more vivid, each one a disturbing replay of the tragic accident she had read about in the diary. She could see the young girl, her face a blur of sorrow and despair, falling, screaming, and then silence, a heavy shroud of grief enveloping the scene. Each morning, she woke drenched in sweat, the images haunting her like the whispers that echoed through the Casa Almeida's halls. The storm crackled like a live wire, and Louisa could hear the wind howling through the cracks of the old mansion. Suddenly, a loud crash of thunder shook the very foundations of the house, causing her to jump out of bed. She hesitated for a moment, torn between the safety of her room and the call of the locked room, a siren song that beckoned her to discover its secrets. The thought of the girl from her nightmares urged her on, and she felt an overwhelming compulsion to confront whatever lay behind that door. With a deep breath, Louisa grabbed her flashlight and tiptoed down the dark hallway, the wooden floor creaking beneath her feet. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown. The air was thick with anticipation, and she could hear the storm's fury outside, punctuated by the occasional clap of thunder. As she reached the door to the locked room, she felt a chill run down her spine. It seemed to breathe, almost alive in the darkness. "Just a quick look," she whispered to herself, her voice barely breaking the silence. She fumbled with the key she had found hidden in the library, her hands shaking as she inserted it into the lock. With a deep exhale, she twisted it, and the door creaked open, revealing a room cloaked in shadows. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust and memories long forgotten. Louisa stepped in cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was eerily preserved, as if time had stood still. A broken doll lay on the floor, its porcelain face cracked, one eye staring blankly at her. It was as if the doll, too, had been waiting for someone to find it. "Oh, what happened here?" Louisa murmured, kneeling to inspect the doll. As she picked it up, she noticed a faded photograph tucked beneath it. Carefully, she unfolded it, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a picture of the girl from her nightmares, standing in front of the very house she now called home, a bright smile on her face that belied the tragedy that would soon unfold. "Who were you?" Louisa whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "What did they do to you?" The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the room in brief flashes. With each strike, Louisa felt the presence of the girl more strongly, as if she were being drawn into the tragic tale woven into the very fabric of the house. She could almost hear the echoes of laughter and joy that had once filled these walls, now replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, a voice broke the stillness, sending chills down her spine. "You shouldn't be here." Louisa spun around to find Mr. Almeida standing in the doorway, his face a mask of anger and despair. "I told you to stay away from this room." "Mr. Almeida, please," Louisa pleaded, her voice trembling. "I need to understand. I saw her, the girl. I need to know what happened to her." His expression softened for a fleeting moment, but then hardened again. "You don't understand the pain of losing a child. It's not something you can comprehend." "I want to help," Louisa insisted, stepping closer, desperation creeping into her voice. "She's still here, isn't she? Trapped by the past?" Mr. Almeida's eyes darkened, and he shook his head. "You need to leave this place, now." "But I can't," Louisa countered, her heart racing. "I have to know. This house, it's alive with her memory, and it's suffocating me." The tension in the room crackled like the storm outside, and Louisa felt a surge of determination. "I won't be afraid anymore. I'll uncover the truth, no matter the cost." Mr. Almeida's gaze bore into her, a mixture of fear and anger flickering across his face. "You don't know what you're asking for. Some truths are better left buried." As he turned to leave, Louisa felt a sense of resolve wash over her. She knew she had to dig deeper to understand the girl's fate and the dark history that enveloped Casa Almeida. The storm raged on outside, but within her a storm of courage began to brew. She would not turn back now. The truth was waiting, and she would find it, even if it led her into the depths of darkness. The dimly lit hallway stretched out before Louisa as she stood before the imposing door of the locked room, her heart pounding in her chest. The confrontation with Mr. Almeida had left her shaken, but she could not ignore the gnawing sense of urgency that pushed her forward. She had to know the truth about the girl, about the family that had been shrouded in shadows for far too long. With a deep breath, Louisa reached for the doorknob, her fingers trembling as she turned it. To her surprise, the door creaked open with a low groan, revealing a darkened space filled with dust motes swirling in the dim light. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness. She stepped inside, her pulse quickening as she took in the sight before her. The room was cluttered with forgotten relics of a life once lived, broken toys, faded photographs, and an eerie silence that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. "Why do you linger here?" A voice echoed from the shadows, causing Louisa to spin around, her breath hitching in her throat. It was Mrs. Almeida, her expression a mix of concern and something darker, something that hinted at a deeper connection to the room. I need to understand," Louisa stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to your daughter?" Mrs. Almeida's face paled, and her eyes flickered with a hint of fear. "You should not be here, Louisa. This place holds memories we cannot change." "But I have to know," Louisa pressed, her determination fueling her courage. "The diary speaks of an accident, and I saw her, the girl in the mirror. She needs help." "You must leave this room," Mrs. Almeida's voice rose, sharp and commanding. "You cannot speak of her. It will only bring more pain." As the tension crackled in the air, Louisa felt the room shift around her, the atmosphere thickening as if the house itself were reacting to their conversation. She could feel the weight of sorrow pressing down, and the shadows seemed to stretch and weave around her, pulling her deeper into the past. "Please, Mrs. Almeida," Louisa said, her voice trembling. "If you do not confront what happened, you will never be free. She is still here, trapped in this house. You must let her go." For a moment, Mrs. Almeida's facade cracked. Tears glistened in her eyes as she took a step back, shaking her head in despair. "You cannot understand the depths of our grief. We loved her more than life itself. It was an accident, a terrible accident." "But she deserves acknowledgement, closure," Louisa urged, her heart racing as she sensed the urgency of their conversation. "You're both haunted by her spirit. Don't you want to set her free?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Mrs. Almeida wrestled with her emotions, a storm brewing behind her eyes. "We have lost so much," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if facing the truth only brings more pain?" "Sometimes pain is the only way to heal," Louisa replied, stepping closer, drawn by an invisible force. She felt the air shimmer with energy, the shadows thickening as they encroached around them. Suddenly, a chilling breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering light from the lone candle. The darkness enveloped them, and Louisa's heart raced as she felt a presence grow stronger. Whispers filled the air, echoing the sorrow and despair that had permeated Casa Almeida for far too long. "Mommy! Daddy!" A soft, childlike voice called out from the shadows, sending chills down Louisa's spine. The girl's spirit flickered into view, a pale figure standing amidst the remnants of her past, her eyes wide with longing and sadness. "Your daughter is calling for you," Louisa said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "You must listen to her." Mrs. Almeida's expression shifted to one of horror as she took a step back, her hands trembling. "No, we cannot," but the girl's voice grew stronger, echoing throughout the room. "You left me behind. Why won't you remember me?" Louisa felt a surge of courage as she stepped forward. "You need to tell her that you love her, that you remember. Only then can she find peace." In that moment, the atmosphere shifted again, and Louisa felt as if she were caught in an unending loop, the echoes of sorrow intensifying around her. The room began to close in, the shadows swirling with a life of their own, tugging at her consciousness. "Mommy! Daddy!" the girl cried again, her voice filled with desperation. Louisa's heart raced as she realized the house was awakening, responding to the unresolved emotions that filled the air. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. "You have to confront your grief," she shouted, her voice ringing with urgency. But as the shadows danced around her, Louisa felt a pull, a chilling sensation that warned her of the impending darkness. She could sense that the house was alive, harboring secrets that were not hers to bear. Time was running out, and she understood that to free the Almeida family and herself, she would have to confront the spirit of the girl before it was too late. The air in Casa Almeida grew thick with tension as Louisa stood in the dimly lit hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just confronted Mr. Almeida about the girl's tragic fate, and the weight of the revelations hung heavy in the air. Now she felt an overwhelming urge to seek out the ghost of the girl, to understand the truth behind the sorrow that enveloped the house. With a determination fueled by desperation, she made her way to the room where she had first felt the chilling presence of the apparition. A small, ethereal figure that seemed to flicker in and out of existence like a dying flame. As she stepped into the shadowy confines of the locked room, she called out softly, "Is anyone here? I need to know the truth." The atmosphere shifted, and a soft whisper echoed in response, sending shivers down Louisa's spine. "Louisa." The voice was faint, like a breeze rustling through autumn leaves. Suddenly, the ghostly form of the girl materialized before her, delicate and translucent. Her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "Why won't they let me go?" The girl's voice trembled, a mixture of sorrow and anger. "My parents, they won't acknowledge what they've done. I am trapped here, bound to this house and their grief." Louisa felt a rush of empathy for the spirit. "I'm so sorry. What can I do to help you?" The girl's gaze dropped to the floor, her small hands twisting in the fabric of her dress. "You must make them see. They refuse to accept their guilt. Until they do, I cannot move on." "But what if they won't listen?" Louisa asked, fear creeping into her voice. "What if they choose to keep you here forever?" The girl looked up, her expression fierce yet sorrowful. "Then you must choose, Louisa. Save yourself, run away and leave me to my fate, or help me confront them. They need to understand that their love has become a prison for me." Louisa's heart raced as she contemplated the weight of the choice before her. She thought of her own life, the dreams she had before coming to Casa Almeida, and the freedom that now felt so far away. But looking into the girl's pleading eyes, she knew she couldn't abandon her. "I will help you," Louisa declared, her voice steady. "I will make them face the truth." With renewed resolve, Louisa hurried back to the main living area, where Mr. and Mrs. Almeida sat in silence, their faces pale and drawn, shadows of their former selves. She approached them, her voice trembling but firm. "You need to talk about her. You have to acknowledge what happened. Your daughter deserves that." Mr. Almeida's eyes narrowed, and the tension in the room became palpable. "What do you know about our pain?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "I know that she's here, suffering because of your refusal to face the truth," Louisa replied, her heart pounding. "She cannot move on until you accept your guilt." Mrs. Almeida's face crumpled in anguish, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We loved her too much to let go," she sobbed, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. "If we accept it, it means she's truly gone." "But by holding on, you're trapping her in this house," Louisa shouted, desperation lacing her words. "You're repeating the cycle of grief. She needs your forgiveness to be free." For a moment, silence enveloped them, the weight of Louisa's words hanging in the air. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, Mr. Almeida's expression shifted from anger to despair. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "We can't let her go. We can't lose her again." "No!" Louisa cried. "You're losing her every day you refuse to acknowledge the truth. You've trapped her here with your sorrow." Suddenly the ground trembled beneath them, and the room darkened as a chilling wind swept through the house. Shadows danced along the walls, and the ghost of the girl appeared between them, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, don't let this happen," she wailed, reaching out to her parents. "You must face it." But instead of responding to their daughter's plea, Mr. and Mrs. Almeida turned their gaze toward Louisa, a dark glint in their eyes. "You think you can save her?" Mr. Almeida sneered. "You will take her place instead." Before Louisa could react, the shadows surged around her, binding her in a cold embrace. The house seemed to come alive, its walls vibrating with sorrow and despair as Louisa felt herself being consumed. "No, this can't be happening," she screamed, struggling against the unseen force. "I won't let it trap me." But as the darkness enveloped her, Louisa felt the weight of the house's sorrow seep into her very being. The last thing she saw was the ghostly girl, tears streaming down her face, as Mr. and Mrs. Almeida mourned the loss of yet another soul to their haunted home. And with that, the walls of Casa Almeida closed around Louisa, binding her spirit to the shadows, forever entwined with the sorrowful echoes of a love that had become a prison.